Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pynakker, and I just want to remind everybody that next week I am going to be interviewing John G. Turner, the author of the newest biography of Joseph Smith. I got a copy from Yale University Press as well as a copy from John G. Turner, and we're going to do a book drawing. So go and send an email to mormonbookreviews@gmail.com. Put in the subject heading JS Biography drawing or something, JS Bio drawing, whatever, just so I know, and leaving your name and address, and we'll probably do a book drawing in the next few weeks. So looking forward to that. And the reason I reached out to Jasmine about putting together this panel discussion a while back. This panel is kind of based on a panel discussion that happened at the Journal of Mormon Polygamy conference in March, and that was quite a successful event, and from my understanding, and a lot of people really appreciated it. And so we're going to kind of touch on that panel, and we want to kind of bring it up to the audience. But there has been a recent development, as you all know. My good friend Christina Rossetti kind of broke a news story this weekend in which the John Taylor revelation, 1886 revelation on the eternal principle um, of plural marriage was finally recognized by the church and is part of the Church History Library catalog. And it's 1886 revelation of John Taylor. So they even call it a revelation, which I think is not insignificant. So I wanted us to talk about that briefly. We're going to talk a little bit about 19th century women who practiced the principle, and then we're going to go and talk about the 21st century polygamy. What does that look like? And we're going to talk to Charlotte, who is practicing the principle. And so we're looking forward to that. So welcome to the program. Jasmine, why don't you introduce our two guests here as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm so excited to be on. Here on this panel, we are so excited to have Seline, who she is a practicing Latter-day Saint. She is in compliance. She's a temple recommend holding, and she is one of the most pro-polygamy LDS women who I have ever encountered. And so she has a lot of interesting ideas regarding the biology aspect of it, the biological aspect of it, as well as polygamy being an eternal principle outside of Joseph Smith practicing polygamy. So she's really interesting. And I do see more and more LDS women who are becoming pro-polygamy, accepting the practice and seeing it, that it goes hand in hand with feminist values, and seeing how it could be a better future than perhaps monogamy. And then we're also so excited to have Charlotte. Charlotte is wonderful. She has a huge household with tons of kids, plural wife, and her family just comes from with the highest regard. Her kids, she has a lot of them, with her sister wife. They put on plays, they do celebrations, they do feasts for Israelite feasts. And so it's really interesting to have this panel where we're able to see the diverse perspectives of polygamy. I know the conversation has usually been, did Joseph Smith practice polygamy or not? But widening the conversation into like interfaith spaces and making spaces within the LDS, I think is very fruitful.
Thank you, Jasmine. I think this is going to be a fascinating conversation. So I just wanted to hear whoever wants to give their thoughts on this letter. I want to address that since this is a breaking story, and we had a great panel discussion with Benjamin Schaefer and Christina Rossetti and Cheryl Bruno the other day, and I've been getting a lot of positive feedback on it. But Celine, did you want to just talk a little bit about that letter that got released this weekend by Christina Rossetti?
Yeah, so it's phenomenal. I'm really excited that the letter was released. What I see is that the church is not only going towards transparency, but they're approaching difficult issues. And so I see them opening the conversation a little more. Now, whether or not they're bringing back polygamy or not, I think is up in the air, and or they're not, you know. However, opening the conversation and allows us all to spiritually grow, to grapple with our history, to grapple with what is it to be a polygamist? Like, what does it look like? What did it look like for these early saints? So I think that spiritually as a family, we're all growing through this conversation. I mean, even outside of religious contexts, we see that we see monogamy in polygamy or polyamory. And we see that people grow through having the conversations, even if they stay monogamous. And so this is just a wonderful opportunity to be able to be open-hearted and open-minded and grow in the way of seeing that all people, all religions are very different and kind of acceptance towards differences of religion and viewpoints.
Wonderful. Anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, so I like everyone who's like in this space already was familiar with the revelation. It seemed like pretty much all the scholars were I already had the consensus that like this is the legitimate document, so I already had that viewpoint. Very exciting that the Church History Library is acknowledging it and is like, yep, this is an existing document. That is very exciting. From my viewpoint, I'm kind of a little different in that like I read the Revelation and I'm like, I think the mainstream church is in compliance with it. Like I don't believe that I don't think plural marriage went away. I just think it's not actively done in this life, but we still have posthumous polygamous Celines all the time. We still have the
Yes.
keys to do so. Like if at any point President Nelson was like, I'm gonna start doing polygamous Celines, he can just do that. So I don't believe that it not being actively practiced. I don't think that conflating the John Taylor revelation with some of the Lauren Woolley claims. I don't think Lauren Woolley is super, from my perspective, from what it seems, is super reliable in his particular
Mhm.
interpretation of things. Um,
Mhm.
I don't really
Yeah.
subscribe to like in order to be in compliance with the John Taylor revelation, like a child must be born from a polygamous Celine every year until the millennium. Like I don't believe that that's what that revelation is saying. I think that it's actually a very reassuring revelation to be like in preparation for the manifesto to be like, hey, this is an eternal principle. I'm not going to go back on these things. So all of the existing polygamous Celines that have occurred, I think they're still valid. And I think it shows that like despite church members who may want it to go away and wish that the church would be like, it was a mistake, oops, sorry, no polygamy. I think that it really reinforces in partnership with D&C 132. I think it reinforces that like this is an eternal principle and it's not going away. And it hasn't gone away. It's just not actively practiced in this life.
Wonderful. And I know, Charlotte, you're not too much into the history. You're more about the 21st century polygamy. But did you, and also actually not only 21st century polygamy, but really you're about biblical polygamy, going back to the original roots of it, is where you're getting inspiration for it. But did you want to say anything about this letter as well?
I will just say that it's exciting for my Mormon fundamentalist friends to just be vindicated after this long, and the truth comes out, and it doesn't need us to defend it; it defends itself. And I like, I'm not the kind of person to like rub things in people's faces, but I do just feel like silently vindicated, I guess. So,
Yeah, when I got the phone calls this weekend, there was a lot of spiking of the football from my friends in
yeah,
the polygamist
yeah.
community, and it was a very fascinating. And I'm so glad that Benjamin had the foresight to actually help organize that panel discussion because I think it was really an important one that we had. And I think this is going to be a very important panel discussion as well. So I thought it was really important for Jasmine to help put this together. And I wanted to just kind of maybe, Jasmine, talk a little bit about the panel discussion you had last March and then and how that was received. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about the voices of the women of 19th century practitioners, practitioners of the principle. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So the panel was about diverse perspectives of polygamy. We had Seline on, Charlotte, Margaret Toscano, and Whitney Horning, all from various backgrounds. Overall, it was so kind. It was so wonderful to see people who disagree being kind to each other, which is kind of not what we see online sometimes. And so it was really nice to just see how kind people were. And I talked to Charlotte and Celine after, and both of them seemed to have a wonderful experience. They were treated well. And that crowd was mostly, I would guess, a polygamy denial crowd. So it was really nice to be able to go into that space and be able to be heard and for our opinions to be spoken without any without any with kindness, received with kindness. And so I just have so much hope for the Mormon family and the health of the Mormon family that we're moving forward. We're able to have these discussions in a very open-hearted and kind manner, which is the way that I think Christ would want. So yeah, it was wonderful. There was some spicy takes with Seline. We did start talking about the value of men in polygamy. And with Charlotte, she talked about the lived experience of a polygamist woman, how she came to receive the revelation of her sister wife being part of the family, and she shared some very spiritual experiences around that. So it was a space where polygamy deniers were able to look a polygamist in the face and see that she is happy with her choices, and she would make them again, and that these choices were inspired. So it was a place of opening, a place of spiritual opening, which is in spiritual practice. It's a large part of spiritual practice to be able to open to the love of others and to different points of view. So yeah, it was a wonderful panel. We talked about polyandry. We talked about how that would look like and if women even want that. We talked about patriarchy versus feminism. We talked about the value of men if polygamy is institutionalized. We talked about hypergamy, which is the idea that women go for the highest value man. We talked a lot about a lot of harder discussions in a kind manner, and I really appreciated that. I think the journal is on the right foot. I think it's going to make a big splash. I think it was needed. And I'm so grateful for Cheryl and Michelle because they come from different camps. Cheryl believes that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy and Michelle doesn't, and they're still able to have a friendship. And they're able to be collaborators in this work. And so that would be my hope, is that we could be collaborators and friends with people who are very different than us. And that's what I see in the Journal of Mormon Polygamy Culture.
Thank you for sharing that, Jasmine. And I was talking to you on the phone last night about how I don't think any podcast that talks about polygamy and doesn't include a practitioner of it is not right. So for all those people
Yes.
out there that want to do stuff about polygamy, I think it's really important to have all the voices on this subject. And again, it's not just something from the 19th century, it's here in the 21st century. But I did want to talk a little bit about some of the female voices, because one of the things that we see is that there are people who believe that Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy, but we have the accounts of women who said that they were married and sealed to Joseph. And I think
Yes.
those voices can't be ignored. Some people say that it was coerced and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff, and that they were lying. And I think it's really important that we let them speak for themselves and maybe just talk about that. So who wants to weigh in on that?
I can take
I
that.
would be,
Oh, go
oh no,
ahead, Celine.
Jasmine can go for it. Go for it. No,
No, I
I'll
already
chime
went.
in
Yeah,
after
yeah. Have
you.
Celine, you go ahead. You go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
And Jasmine can. Yeah.
I just, I'm very passionate about these women. I really love and adore them. I think that that is one of the biggest flaws on the polygamy denial is you have to really discount every woman except for Emma. And I believe in more than one woman, if you will. And I don't think that by saying it's like, oh, they were just coerced. I'm like, have you read what they have written? When I go through and I read the woman's exponent, when I read Eliza R. Snow Smith, I refer to her that way because that's how she wanted to be called at the end of her life. When I read her response to the Reynolds versus United States Supreme Court decision, like it brings me to tears. I'm just like, this, these are women with so much conviction on this topic that are able to articulate themselves very well. They are very educated, they're very connected. I think that there becomes this one of the unfortunate side effects of the more kind of like abusive sects of fundamentalism that are more sequestered. And to be fair, some of that is created due to the legal restrictions. It becomes this like, okay, these women who are sequestered and treated as property and don't have any connection with the outside world and don't have any education. It's just like that's not what these women were. And we kind of imagine that that's what these women were. And it's like these women were going out east and getting medical degrees. These women were in correspondence with suffrage and like involved in the suffrage movement. These were the first women in the United States to vote. And so so many of their progressive things, like the Relief Societies of Utah, they were like political like groups. Like one of their main things was pushing for um suffrage and defending their right to their religion and plural marriage. And they were so active and so like independently active in a lot of ways. Like they were probably more independently active than women in the church are today. And I think that I depart from a lot of feminist scholars who will look at these incredible women of early Utah and they'll say they did this in spite of polygamy. And I kind of view it as like, I think they're doing it because of polygamy. I think that the power structures that it created and the amount of flexibility it gave women really gave them a lot of benefits. I think that you see this like really, really incredible advancement of women. I mean, it's just really hard to when when you have a a religious leader who's like a known healer, and two doctors, all of whom can vote, are at like a national women's suffrage convention, like representing Utah, and everyone's like, oh, they are victims because they are polygamists. And it's like they have more economic, social, legal, and political rights than any other woman in that room. And they're like looking down on them. And I just think that that is so incredible. And I really would like the women's exponent. If someone somewhere can please get the women's exponent in print so we can actually like have it more accessible. You can still see it on the church history library. Like you can go and pull up the PDF and like read through it, but it's so it's one of the most difficult publications to like really take a look at. And I think it's one of the most important to understand women's perspectives on this.
Hmm.
Well, and it is true because it was up until the 1930s, the Relief Society essentially was its own organization with their own budget. The women were in control of it. It was a there was a strong matriarchy within that was there, and it made its way into the 20th century. So I think that that's
Yeah.
really important for people to know that these women were pretty independent from the church and could do their own thing. And I think I'm saddened that it still isn't that way. Let's just say that's just my own personal opinion, but I think it's important for women to have their voices heard and also for them to be have their own independent editorializing and everything that they were able to do. So Jasmine, you said you wanted to talk about this as well. So
Yeah, I love everything Celine said, and I think Celine is actually talking about the lived experience. Polygamy does buy a lot of independence. When you look at time, it buys a lot of independence with time. It buys a lot of freedom, and so to divorce the suffrage movement from polygamy it's kind of you can't do that. It's kind of hard to do when it happened in the exact same period with the exact same women, and that's very interesting. In regards to the actual conversation about not believing women, I believe that most of the polygamy denial arguments are referencing the Temple Lot case. Um,
That's true.
and I can actually give on that. I actually think that that's valid. There was a lot of legal pressure there. There was a lot of eyes on them. There was a lot of people watching from all the way to Brigham Young all the way down. However, something that has not been addressed is Andrew Jenson's Eliza R. Snow list, where Eliza R. Snow gives him a lot of the polygamous woman's name, and then he goes and talks to those women and affirms that. So I think that this is the wonderful part of this conversation is that we're able to have this back and forth. So if a polygamy denier hears this and they say, oh, or like a monogamy affirmer, I want to say, says, oh, okay, well, let's work with the Andrew Jensen list more instead of the Temple Lot cases. I do think on people who are pro-polygamy, I do think there's space to give on the Temple Lot cases that anyone under legal
That's fair.
pressure would feel that way. However, let's deal with the Andrew Jensen
yes, and I want you
research.
to explain what this is all about because it's really important that these were not coerced testimonies or anything like this. This is somebody who independently went to these individual women and interviewed them and got their story.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So Andrew Jensen was one of the earliest polygamy researchers, and he went all over Utah. He went to Lehigh, he went to Salt Lake, and he basically he put together a list of Joseph Smith's original wives, and he did this because Eliza R. Snow and we have confirmed it's her writing. Don Bradley, my husband, has confirmed with BYU professors that this is her writing. She actually wrote down the list, the names, and they were like on the front doorstep. There was no legal pressure. This was not coerced. So he goes name by name by name by name, and he talks to these women who it's just him and this woman in this private room. And so there's no level of coercion, there's no legal pressure. And so those are the testimonies. The Andrew Jenson research really is some of the most powerful, besides the William Clayton journals. There is some of the most powerful history from women to show that Joseph Smith was a polygamist.
So just to be clear, Jensen was going around and interviewing the women who claimed to be plural wives of Joseph Smith, correct?
Correct, correct. He got a list of names, and that's actually available online. And I do think it's available on Brian Hales's website. I have to double check. But he got a whole list of names of women, and half were written in his handwriting, and the other half were written in Eliza R. Snow's handwriting, Snow Smith's handwriting. And so that really hasn't been contended with much. I don't hear many people talking about that. I hear them talk about the Temple Lot case, and I think that's a given. They were pressured, or they were under pressure. I don't know if they were pressured, but they were under pressure. But the Andrew Jenson research, they were not under pressure. And
And
go ahead.
I just wanted to add, like, I'm glad you brought that up because also I wanted to mention that Don did present about this list at the polygamy conference as well, and it was really, really cool to see him go through kind of like how to interpret and see and read a historical document like that to tell who wrote what, when, and what, and you can tell someone's listening to it. It was really, really incredible for him to go through that since it was at the polygamy conference. I wanted to mention that. It was incredible.
It was, yeah. So I hope that this will give the polygamy, the monogamy affirmers. I hope that they'll work with the Andrew Jensen list more and kind of come up with a rebuttal to that. Because that's the beauty of this, is that there's a thesis, there's an antithesis, and they collide. And then an antithesis comes from that. And so that's the beauty of this conversation, is that it's evolving. So yeah, we'll just put that out there about the Andrew Jensen research.
Okay,
And I
and
do appreciate about people in that viewpoint that it makes this conversation is becoming more of a focal point and something like we need to re-examine because of them. And so even though I disagree on conclusions, I am very grateful for being like, we have to deal with this. That attitude is helpful.
thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. Well, anything else about the women's voices of the 19th century? Because I think this is an important topic. Anything else you want to add to it?
I just wanted to plug real quick The Economics of Polygamy by Carrie Miles.
Okay.
And she talks a lot about this. So she talks about in an economic context, polygamy is not by definition crazy or unnatural, nor was it particularly degrading to women, since it was probably the best alternative available under the circumstances. Um, so yeah.
Where can people find that paper?
So it was published by Sunstone, so they can find it in Sunstone, August 1998.
August 1998. Okay, of Sunstone. All right. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's so important because, of course, during the period of the 20th century, going into the 1920s, you basically started seeing real crackdowns on polygamy, and then people being excommunicated for even practicing the principle as opposed to just for being sealers and all this kind of stuff. And you really start seeing it petering out in the main branch of the Brighamite branch. During this period of time in the 20th century, you basically see this split between Mormon fundamentalism and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in one sense, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints were practicing Mormon fundamentalists in one sense until this started breaking off. And then what you saw was some of the harshest laws against polygamy on the books in Utah and enforced. And so we saw a lot of that. And then, of course, you saw David O. McKay,
Yeah.
correlated history. So we start seeing, the shave all your beards off, guys. We're going to become 1950s mainline Protestants.
Beach Boys.
Yep, exactly. And so now you have this cultural shift away from even the appearance of polygamy, even shaving the beards off, all these kind of things, and so you see this transition to becoming a modern 20th century Protestant type church. And so then, of course, you just continue to see the divergence happening. And of course, I've had Ann Wild on to talk about the important role that she and Ogden Kraut played in establishing Mormon fundamentalism. And so that was an important conversation we've had. And of course, I've had Ogden Kraut's son come on a couple times as well to talk about the history of 20th century fundamentalism and the practice of polygamy. But I kind of want to talk a little bit, since we've covered a lot of that already on the program. I'm actually very fascinated by the 21st century. This is a practice, and I thought we could address that. So I want to bring Charlotte into this conversation because you are practicing the principle in a 21st century context, but interestingly enough, not in the 19th century context. You'd say that's too late. You're saying we're patterning it after the biblical model of the practice of the principle. Now, keeping in mind that, of course, in the Book of Mormon, there's many interpretations of the Book of Mormon about the passage in Jacob that condemns polygamy. However, it seems to condemn the excesses of David and Solomon. It never seems to condemn the Abrahamic, the patriarchs' practice of the principle. So, Charlotte, that's probably where you're kind of viewing it as well from that perspective. And you, of course, are part of like the Hebrew roots movement, Messianic, and all that. So, just tell us a little bit about your practice of the principle in the 21st century.
Yeah, thank you. Good questions. So I do want to start with the foundation that I have nothing but condemnation for the kind of plural marriage that includes prepubescent girls or coercion. I'm talking about consenting adults. I'm talking about women getting to choose who they marry from the entire pool, whether the man is single or married. More choices for women, not fewer choices. And also, I guess this is where my belief is most different from my Mormon fundamentalist friends, is that I don't believe that polygamy should be mandatory. I don't think it should be required. I think it should just be allowed by the people who want to do it. I don't think there are enough women to even go around to support the idea that men have to have plural wives. So I guess that's kind of a bit of a foundation. Now, my background is Mormonism. I grew up in the mainstream church, and I didn't really know that much about polygamy at all. And what I did know was, I would say, mostly negative. And my husband was always interested in like the older things, I guess, but I was just ignorant about it. And I had no idea when I entered into monogamy that it was going to end up polygamy. That was never the plan. But my husband and I had been married for about 10 years. We got married in the temple. He's a returned missionary. You know, we met in college and we had a few children. And I started realizing there were problems with the church. And I became kind of a little too interested in whether or not the church leadership was receiving any revelations, because they didn't seem to be. Like, they didn't get up in general conference and say, "Thus saith the Lord," or any of those words. And somebody wiser than me pointed out that instead of focusing on whether the church leadership was receiving revelation from God, I should be interested in whether I was receiving revelation from God. And I can't say I was. I knew that, like my parents had taught me, you can pray for help making big life decisions, but I didn't ever consider the idea that maybe God had other things to tell me too along the way. And so I became very interested in having like a really personal relationship with God, and hearing what he had to say about my life. And my husband had always been like that, so he waited years for me. And so one piece of advice I would give to anyone that's married to someone that doesn't quite see things the same way religiously, excuse me, or spiritually, is to have patience, because everybody has their own timing with these things, and you can't rush it and you can't force it. So anyway, so when I finally came along to the idea of like God leading our lives, my husband was right there with me, and we started receiving like these concurrent revelations that were unexpected, I guess. One of the revelations we both received at the same time was that someone was going to be moving in with us. And so we prepared 2 bedrooms for the mystery people that would be moving in. We put beds and dressers in there, and they were just sitting in there empty. I moved all my children back into the master bedroom, and we were just ready and waiting, and I had no idea what was coming. But in the meantime, as I said, I started to notice problems with the church, and my good friend Melissa was also on like a really parallel journey with me. She'd grown up in the church, but she'd also started to focus on her own like scripture reading and prayer and that kind of thing. And so we would discover together, we would share articles with each other about problems with the church. And we were both, I would say, pretty well at peace with the idea that the church was what we called a state of apostasy. They were in a state of apostasy, but that it was still the best place for us to be, and that we should, in the meantime, focus on ourselves. And we were very close friends. I don't want to speak for her and say I was her best friend and she was my best friend. And we also started receiving revelations, but they seem to be opposite of each other, not the same, like with my husband. So for instance, she told me she was actually married at the time and had children that, well, they were teenagers, and she felt like God was going to be moving her somewhere, whereas I felt like I was going to be staying put and even like getting my house ready for someone to come. So maybe you can see what's coming in the story, but I was really sad by the idea that Melissa was going to be taken away from me because I loved her dearly, and I didn't want her to ever be out of my life. And I even told her that if she was being taken away like Lehi was, that I hoped I was her Ishmael and that she would somehow come back for me, and that I loved her. I wanted to be her sister in Zion. And so anyway, I mean, looking back, all the details, just the way God works, and like he weaves a beautiful tapestry, and the timing and the planning. I just praise God for his doing and all this. But so anyway, let's see. I'll jump to where Melissa is, her marriage is falling apart, and her husband tells her that he wants her to move out, and she has nowhere to go. And especially if she wants to stay where her teenagers are in their schools and not have to move them. It's like she's got family across the country, but it would really be disruptive to her children. So I remember this day very well. She texted me and told me that her husband wanted her to move out, and they weren't his children. They were her children from a previous marriage. And my heart just went out to her, and I wanted to say, come live with me. I have room for you. But of course I wouldn't do that without talking to my husband. So we kind of texted about it throughout the day. And then that evening when Joshua, that's my husband, got home from work, I was telling him about this predicament that Melissa found herself in, and telling her that she needs a place to stay. And I was kind of hoping that he would suggest that she move in, but he didn't. And what I didn't know is that while I'm telling him this story, God is speaking to him and telling him that Melissa is coming to his house and that she is to become his plural wife. And that really, really shocked him, because he knew that I hated polygamy and that it would destroy our marriage if he were to ever bring that up. Because every time in the past we'd ever talked about plural marriage, it ended in a fight. I didn't understand it. It made me so mad. I was insecure and jealous and all the things. And so we couldn't even like have a conversation about it. And so here's God telling Joshua to do this. And he's not just going to blurt that out to me, but he's kind of processing that. And from my point of view, I'm just trying to figure out how I can help my friend. And I bring it up later in the evening again. I say, Melissa needs a place to live. We've got these 2 bedrooms that are ready for someone to move in. What do you think about me inviting her and her teenagers to move in with us? And and I thought it would just be temporary. And he said to me, yes. But again, God was speaking to him and saying, yes, Melissa's coming to your house and she's going to become your wife. And so over the next couple of days in conversation, Joshua told God, I am willing to do your will, as you know, but I'm not willing to have it destroy my marriage with Charlotte. So I'm putting a condition on this, and that is that Charlotte has to be the one to bring it up and suggest it. And Joshua knew that I would never ever do that, and so he was off the hook. And in the meantime, I texted Melissa excitedly. I said, we have 2 bedrooms and a bathroom for you to move in whenever you need. And 3 days later, she was living in our home. And I had been experiencing, I would say, I was learning to receive revelation. I was learning when it was God versus my own ideas versus the adversary. I was interested in having communication with God, but oh my goodness, after Melissa moved in, it was like the heavens just opened and I started hearing the voice of God on a regular basis. Every day I started getting these revelations about Melissa marrying Joshua. And it was really shocking to me. I wasn't interested in polygamy. I didn't know anything about polygamy. I didn't know any polygamists. It wasn't part of my life plan, none of that. And I would just be like folding laundry, and it would just be like this download from God that Melissa was going to marry Joshua, or that I had to, that I was going to be sharing Joshua with Melissa, and even that Melissa would have his children. And I was just totally shocked by all of this. In fact, to the point I had a baby that was exclusively breastfed at the time. And I started to lose my milk supply because of the stress of it. It was like very emotional for me to think about sharing my husband with another woman. And I'm going to maybe get a little more into the emotional journey of the whole thing, because I think that's what a lot of it is for women, is the emotional part. But anyway, so I just basically stopped eating just without even noticing it because of the stress, and almost lost my milk supply. I didn't even realize it until the baby started suffering, but then I was able to recover it. And anyway, so in the meantime, though, Melissa's living in her home, and I am just like totally confident that this is going to happen. I don't know what the time frame is, but I have tons and tons of concerns with polygamy. And God, in his tender mercy, starts showing me how it is that a man can love multiple women and take care of multiple women. And so I have many experiences, like Joshua coming home from work, I'll feed him dinner, and then he says to me, is there anything I can do to make life easier for you? And I'll say, oh yeah, like the kitchen faucet's still dripping, can you fix that? And then he fixes the kitchen faucet. And then he goes to Melissa and he says to her, you just moved in, is there anything I can do to help you be more comfortable? And Melissa says, I need a place to hang my calendar on the wall. Could you put a nail in the wall? And so he puts a nail in the wall, and now she has a spot to hang her calendar. And I watched that happen and just kept imagining if he was my husband and Melissa's husband, here he is taking care of both of us, and him putting a nail in the wall for her to hang her calendar, that does not take away from his love for me or his care for me or any of that. And so I started to kind of understand it better conceptually. There was another incident when I got up in the morning. He leaves very early for work, so he's long gone. And I went to get dressed, and in my dresser drawer, there was a love note from him. And it wasn't like an everyday thing. It was like a really special thing to me that he'd written me this really sweet love note. And I found out later in the day that he had also written a note to Melissa, not exactly a love note, but just a note telling her that she's welcome in her home and that it's an honor to have her there. And he had left it on her windshield. And I realized the initial motivation to write the note to me came from his wanting to write a note to Melissa first. So he wanted to write a note to Melissa, and because he was already there with a pad of paper and he'd written her a note, then he wrote a note to me as well. And so actually, his love for Melissa made his love for me grow, not shrink. And it was such a surprise to me, because I imagined that you split the love. I had no idea that the love would actually grow. And I have many more stories, but I'll leave it there for now as far as examples of the love growing. But there definitely, the spirit was in it. And I just tried to cope with the emotions. It took me, I would say, years to really get over the emotional part, but in like with the next few weeks, I went really far. And I kept waiting for Joshua to bring up this idea because I was so confident that this is what God had in store for us. And I just kept waiting for him to bring it up. And of course, he's waiting for me to bring it up. And he thinks I never will. Well, so the day comes when I'm just like, final, like, we just got to talk about this. And so our very first conversation about it, my opening line is, so Joshua, are you going to marry Melissa? That was my opening line. And he was just floored by my saying that. He didn't expect it. We hadn't talked about it yet. And his response surprised me because I thought he was going to just say yes, but he didn't. He said, well, I don't know. And I said, what do you mean you don't know? I know. And he said, well, she has to say yes. And then I realized, oh, yeah, I guess like if there's a possibility she wouldn't say yes. Like that hadn't occurred to me. I just thought she would want to. So anyway, to hurrying it to the end of the story, he asked her, and at first she was just really surprised. She wasn't expecting it, but God spoke to her and spoke peace to her. And let me say too, we were all members of the church at the time, and we weren't, this isn't under the influence of any fundamentalist studying or fellowshipping or any of that. And so I just can't help but say like just all glory to God for it, because if he wasn't in it, it never ever would have happened. So we got married. That was let's see, 2013, so 12 years ago.
Okay.
And we lived apart for 5 years, and I think that was good. But now we live together, and I definitely prefer that. And we've been excommunicated from the church, and over the last 10 years or so, we've really become more and more interested in keeping the Torah. And now we celebrate all the biblical holidays. And by the way, Jasmine, I appreciate that you called them the Israelite feasts, because a lot of people call them Jewish feasts. And I'm like, but they're not only for the Jews, they're for all Israelites, not just the tribe of Judah. I'm from the tribe of Ephraim, and they're mine too. So some people even call them God's feasts, not Jewish or Israelite at all. But
Well,
anyway.
it was Melissa who corrected me on that.
Oh,
So
yeah, that's good. Yeah, we're like that. We're not Jews. It's confusing for people because the Jews are definitely like the biggest population of people that celebrate these holidays and stuff. But yeah, definitely not Jews. But I think it's a little odd that Mormons don't embrace the Hebrew things more. Like the House of Israel is a huge concept all throughout Mormon scripture and teaching, and even our hymns and stuff. And so like we're all claimed to be Israelite, but many people just don't really practice any Israelite things.
Well, it's interesting, Charlotte, because you know I didn't realize how strong the Messianic movement was within the Restoration until I had Dr. Nehemiah Gordon on, one of the
Mm.
top Hebrew scholars in the world and a good friend. And all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, there's something going on here. It's really fascinating. Now, I'm just really curious because, of course, I'm friends with Benjamin Schaefer, and they've been integrating a lot of the feast days into their church as
Yeah.
well. Do you actually practice Sabbatarianism, or do you still are you still worshiping on Sunday, or are you worshiping on Saturday now? How?
Definitely Seventh day Sabbath. Yeah, we Friday night at sunset, we light our candles and have our wine and bread, and then on Saturday we're studying the scriptures and resting and not going to the store and all the things. Yep.
I'm curious because, of course, one of the more prominent branches of, well, it was prominent, but it's quite small now. But of course, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with a capital D and no hyphen, aka the Strangites, also are Sabbatarian, and they
Mm.
practice Seventh Day observance as well. Have you ever had any interactions with the Strangite community?
Not that I remember. We have fellowshipped with like 10 different Mormon groups, but I don't remember any Strangites.
Okay, that's interesting. It should be interesting to look at the history of that church because they were doing a lot of the same things you're doing now.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like
Heard
you're
that, yeah.
following a very similar pattern. Celine, I just wanted to hear from you. Of course, you're coming to this from like a feminist perspective, but you call yourself a vanilla Latter-day Saints on off the call. And I just wanted to ask you, like, what kind of tell us a little bit about your journey into the idea of embracing at least the idea of polygamy.
Yeah, so for me, it really came down to I'm a filmmaker by trade, and when I started producing and going into development on a film that was diving into polygamy, I was like, okay, this is something I should dive into more. It wasn't something that was particularly um, a concerning or distressing topic to me ever, but it was not something I ever really dove into. And as I dove into it, I was very shocked when I was like, wait, we were the first women in the United States to vote. And I was like, how come growing up in Utah, no one told me that? And like, I found out about that in 2021. And I'm like, that's crazy. No one, and I'll tell people that, and people like, I didn't know that. And people still don't know that. And that's really wild. And so then I started looking into it and I saw how intertwined um, women's suffrage and women's rights and like this early feminism was with polygamy and was very much part of the identity of early Latter-day Saints. Um, and that was extraordinarily empowering and eye-opening to me. Like the fact that women at that time, like they were able to initiate divorces. And I very much like listening to Charlotte's story. Like I think it's like genuinely such a beautiful story. And I think that Charlotte and I very much agree a lot on like kind of the biological and the social, like the sort of optimal things. I believe that she should have the legal right to have this family system. Like I think that Melissa being able to be a legal wife would be wonderful, and I would fight for that legal right. I think the only place that we would disagree is I'm just so devoted to the authority structure of the church in terms of like priesthood authority and keys. And so that's the only place that I think that we really depart. And what I think is so beautiful about Charlotte's story is it's so female driven. Like it's very much Charlotte making, like you guys making that choice. And I think that that is the only way that polygamy can be ethically and ideally implemented. I think that it very much, when you look at the biology and the sociology, and even scripturally, in my opinion, it's so supposed to be female driven. It's supposed to be women making and administering that law. And I think that that's something that's very frustrating to me when I see some sects of Mormon fundamentalism where it's not women making that decision. And I think that that is contrary to the laws of nature and also the will of God. And so that is very much kind of because after I started going into the feminism thing, I was like, I need to just go into gender generally. And I started going into biology and sociology and looking at kind of like, let's look at evolutionary psychology and all these sorts of things. And something I love about also Charlotte, you saying not going back far enough, I think that that's also true. So something that I think that looking at early Latter-day Saint polygamy, it doesn't have to be a perfect example. There's totally bad situations and bad things that happen that I can totally be like, that shouldn't have happened, and we can condemn that. One example
Absolutely.
is I think that there should probably be a cap on wives, and we see this actually when we brought in our look at plural marriage, right? At polygamy as an idea. In Islam, you have a four wife cap. In the Talmud, in Jewish scripture, that tradition, there is a recommendation of a four wife cap. Even if we look at Jacob, he has four wives. When we look evolutionarily with like hunter gatherers, generally in the economics of, I actually just recently learned this, generally in the economics of hunter and gatherer peoples, men only really had up to four uh, mates or partners. And it was only after the invention of agriculture and therefore the invention of wealth inequality that we see these large harems of multiple wives beyond that four wife cap. And so when you see that other places, it's like, okay, it seems like that is an inevitable piece that could have come up or should have come up or would come up. Or maybe it's something that if women are fully making those decisions, that's going to kind of naturally equalize, because even those large groups of women being married to one man, like we could have like the 40 plus wives, this is high level leadership, high economic prosperity. And I think that that is an imbalance. And part of it is also like they're figuring it out. Part of it is also
Yes.
somewhat dynastic, where you have Brigham Young taking on a lot of Joseph Smith's wives. So I think like Eliza marrying Brigham Young is very much like a legitimacy marriage, a power legitimacy marriage more than anything else. And so that gets straight. And also at that time frame, you also have law of adoption sealings. And so
Yes.
people are being, so in terms of figuring out how sealing should be structured generally, a lot of stuff is in flux. And so I think that it's not, when you look back and you see things that shouldn't have happened a certain way, or was like, oh, that was bad, I guess. I don't think that means you need to throw out the entire system. I think that that's something we can learn from and say like, okay, well, we didn't like that, but maybe there's something else. What were you saying, Jasmine?
I was going to riff off of what you're saying. I absolutely love that. So this is something that the polyamorous community, and I know the LDS nor the fundamentalists really look into polyamory research, but the polyamorous community calls this polysaturation. And so this is when one person who is married to multiple people no longer can sustain those marriages without the quality going down. So it's kind of quantity versus quality. And Charlotte kind of referenced that earlier when she was saying love can grow. So love kind of like when you have a child, you have multiple children, right? And love is infinite, but time and resources are not. And so this is where this idea of the four wife cap, or even three or two, or even one, makes sense depending on the man and the woman. So polysaturation is something, anything poly related is nothing. I've heard almost no conversation about it in this conversation about polygamy acceptance or polygamy denial. And that would be really fruitful because this is Charlotte's lived experience. Like, how does it work with multiple wives? Like, how can it actually be sustained this way? I also had a thought about the Heber C. Kimball Lawless Woman Revelation, which Claire Barris did a presentation on it in the Journal of Mormon Polygamy conference. And this is where Heber C. Kimball had 50 plus wives, and the wives started getting really upset at him. You know, of course, they're not getting enough time. You know, they might have enough resources, but they're not getting enough time for it to be considered like a marriage, right? And so what we see with the Lawless Woman Revelation is that we see polysaturation. We see the limit of polysaturation being far stretched. And so this is something that in the polygamous community, they actually have a lot of wisdom about when it comes to the law of Sarah. There has been some abusive ways that the law of Sarah has been practiced. But the law of Sarah in general, and in the ways different people read it, is kind of trying to work with this idea of polysaturation and working with consent. Like, who chooses the next wife? Is it the first and the second wife together choosing the next wife, or is it the husband? And so these things are all up for conversation. And so this is why I think back to the 1886 revelation, this is why I think that this is so important, because it's opening the conversation little by little, and grappling with our hard history, but then also being able to see the beauty in the human mess here that we restorationists are. Charlotte, she has resurrected some of the very, very old um, Torah keeping and Israelite keeping traditions. And as a restoration movement, I mean, I think that we embrace things like that, or I would hope that we would embrace different traditions. And so polygamy is just one of the many facets of that. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, just real quick,
And
I would.
Jasmine, I want to add in, I have to add in the one thing with the polysaturation. This is also biblical. Like, I just want to read just Exodus 21:10. It says, and if you take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall not diminish. That's already like a commandment. That's already a biblical commandment of like, if you can't provide all of those needs, then you can only take up to as many wives as you can provide for. Continue, sorry.
No, I love that. I love it.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, I just, Jasmine, I think it's, just talk a little bit about this lawless woman revelation that you were talking about, so the audience understands exactly what he was saying, because maybe not everybody's familiar with it.
Yeah, so Claire Barris does really good research in this. So this was a revelation that was given to Heber C. Kimball, and he had 50 plus wives, and the wives were unhappy with him. And the revelation basically says, do the Lord's work even if the wives are unhappy. So it basically kind of gave him the fortitude to keep moving on, even though he had basically an army of people mad at him, an army of women mad at him. And so why were these women mad in the first place? And they weren't getting enough time. They were not getting enough, I think resources were okay, but they weren't getting enough time. And so what is marriage? That's where we come at this, like, is marriage one every 2 nights, one every 3 nights, one every 50 nights? And so these are the complex conversations that polygamists and people who want to enter into this space have, is like, how does this actually work? And so we see polysaturation in Joseph Smith's polygamy. We see it in Brigham Young's polygamy. We see it in Heber C. Kimball's polygamy, and many other leaders. And so it is something that I think that people who are against polygamy, they really struggle with. And for people who practice polygamy or polyamory, polysaturation is a very important principle. So it's not taking on more spouses than you can provide for, that you can spend time with, and to keep them happy. And I know Charlotte has a lot to say about keeping 2 wives plus happy. It's hard. It's really hard. And so polygamy isn't, when we look at historical polygamy, we think of 50 plus women, and that makes us feel like numbers, and that makes us feel like we don't have identities and things like that. But in reality, the actual functional polygamists and the polyamorous world, they don't live by those numbers. They live by small, small numbers, usually the most functional ones that I have seen.
I just want to bring in, just as I'm having this conversation, I'm remembering there's a woman who used to live in my Christian community here who's a retired missionary who spent a lot of time in South Africa, actually with a ministry kind of affiliated with John G. Lake, which is a very important Pentecostal pioneer of the early 20th century. And she was with this ministry for a long time, and she befriended one of the plural wives, if you will, of the Zulu king. And this he had multiple wives, and this woman was a born again, spirit filled, tongue speaking Pentecostal woman who
Yeah.
was a plural wife, and was practicing the principle as well. So I'm just saying this isn't just your little thing here. This is actually happening even in the Christian community as well, where we do have polygamy practice. So it's not, let's not pretend, folks, that these things don't happen in our world as well, because of course we have Tony Alamo, who was practicing principle. Unfortunately, he was doing underage girls, so we condemn that. But I'm just saying that there are, and Tony Alamo's ministry is still on the Word Network, on television, folks. So this
Yeah.
is fascinating stuff. Charlotte, I actually, it's so fascinating because, of course, you're actually living the principle, and you've been living it for a while now. What would you say, like, if somebody was interested in this idea of maybe living the principle, what kind of advice would you have for them in like, how does a 21st century practice of this ancient practice look like and work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on what point of view you're coming from. Are you coming from the point of view of the man, the existing, the monogamous wife, the incoming wife? There's like different sets of advice I would give. For the man that's interested in living this, first of all, I would say don't do it without having your first wife on board. That seems kind of obvious. And to get her on board, I don't have any advice. I have no idea. Prayer, I don't know. So it's probably, the thing is, if Joshua had talked me into it, then every problem that had come up, it would be his fault. It would be, I would resent him for it. But because I was just obeying God, it was like, take that up with God kind of thing. I would say if you have to talk your wife into it, you're setting yourself up for trouble. As far as the cap on wives, okay, one reason I think not every man should have plural wives is because it takes a lot of bandwidth to have more than one wife. Okay, one wife I think is like fairly doable for like your average guy. I only think the above average men should even attempt to have multiple wives. And so it's really unfair to say you're not going to be able to get into heaven unless you have multiple wives. Because if you are trying to keep 2 or more women happy, that's going to take up all your time, all your energy, all your conversation. Like, you're not going to be able to go out with your buddies. You're not going to be able to like have tons and tons of hobbies on the side. So from the man's point of view, like, you have to be prepared for that. Like, one of the misconceptions about plural marriage or polygamy is that the man must be like lustful or want to have like multiple sexual partners. And I think that's really unfair, because we don't say that about the single man who's engaged to be married. We don't point at him and say, oh man, he must really want to have sex with her. Like, it's fine to have a monogamous wife, but then suddenly you have multiple wives and it's all about that. Like, it doesn't really make sense. The man has to be prepared to take care of multiple women. So that should give them pause. As far as from the women point of view, I think the main piece of advice that I would have is to really embrace the Sermon on the Mount and the golden rule of considering the other wife or wives in every situation and trying to see things from her point of view, because it just doesn't work if you're just only thinking of yourself. You have to be thinking of her and doing things that consider her in mind. So, and not even the golden rule, but like the so-called platinum rule, where like you're doing the things that you're acting in a way that she would want you to act. And my sister wife is very good at this. Like, she considers me in everything she does that might affect me. It's really amazing. Like, I have tons and tons of stories. I actually have articles about it on my blog about how many ways that she's helped me and considers me. And she's a very good example of this. So from like both points of view, like you can't, if you're the first wife, okay, and you are interested in living this, you can't expect that you are going to be the boss of her. Like, look at it from her point of view. Is she going to want you or need you to be her boss? No, she's going to want to have autonomy. She's going to want to paint her bedroom the color she wants to paint it. She's going to want to like have her own living space and, you know, cook her own meals and raise her children the way she wants to raise them and all the things. So you can't expect to like invite her in and then be the boss of her. So yeah, I would say mostly it's a golden rule. It's also things like I mentioned, the Sermon on the Mount, like if you see a mote in someone's eye, like always be looking at the beam in your own. Like, I think one of the beautiful things about polygamy is the chances that it gives you to develop in character, because I think every relationship you have and every person that you live with is a way for you to grow and learn and always be moving upwards. So that would be the advice, I guess. And I do, on my blog, I have like, there's a whole category on advice for people. So not that I'm an expert, but I have learned a lot. And the other authors on my blog have also learned a lot. And so they like to. Can I respond to some of the other things that were being talked about?
Oh, absolutely. That's fine. And by the way, Charlotte, I want you to either contact Jasmine or me directly, and we'll provide a link to your blog in the description.
Okay.
So, okay, continue, Charlotte.
Good. So, Seline was talking about the priesthood authority and the keys, and that's like where we differ. I think that's correct. I want to state my position on that, which is I don't think you need priesthood authority to marry monogamously or plurally. I don't think that is required. I think that God wants people to get married, and if you can find a way to get sealed, like, good for you, but I don't think that somehow you're living in adultery or you're not fornicating if you just get married on your own. I mean, people who aren't religious get married, and I'm fine with that too. So I don't think that there's a different priesthood authority required for first or second or third or fourth marriages. I think it should just be up to the adults. But definitely we agree on it being female driven. As far as the cap on wives, I do think it's interesting that both Islam and Judaism have this suggested cap of 4 wives. I want to know who's going to enforce that. It seems like it's got to be just self-enforced by the people who are doing it, but definitely there should be some kind of limit, but it's going to be on an individual basis. I see it as being similar to like the number of children a woman should have. Like, women are biologically limited to the number of children they should have. But putting that aside, like, there's only a certain number of hours in the day and a certain amount of bandwidth that a woman has. And so, of course, she has to consider that as she's growing her family. Like, where does she stop? Like, where does she say, this is pretty much my limit. I'm just going to focus on the children I already have. Like, men would definitely need to do that too. On the other hand, if there are tons and tons of women wanting to marry a man, like, he must be a really amazing man. And that brings me to another misconception about plural marriage. And I had this one even after I became a plural wife, is this idea that somehow plural husbands are creeps. That was the word I would have used, because it just seems, it's so foreign that I had this idea that plural husbands are creeps. And it finally like dawned on me, if you have 2 or 3 beautiful, educated, smart women that all want to be married to the same man, like, why would they choose a creep? Of course they're going to choose to be married to like the highest caliber man that's available. And so that's just total bunk that they're going to be creeps. Now, in a situation where they're being coerced and they're being forced to marry, of course that's different, but I'm talking about, again, the consenting adults. So
well, I've always found it
well,
interesting too, just from a biological sense, that, why would we have been created or evolved where men's can reproduce from their teens till they die,
right.
and women have this shorter cycle. So it does seem biologically that we were made for men to have multiple wives to be able to reproduce. It seems like that is kind of hardwired into our into who we are as Homo sapiens.
Yeah, I think so. There are a lot of biological reasons why polygyny makes sense. Polygyny, as distinguished from polyandry, where one woman has multiple husbands, like, that doesn't make sense on any sort of biological level. So yeah, and probably if we're going to go down the biological road, Celine's going to have a lot to say too. But
I will.
yeah, well, let me finish my thought. I was saying is that the women that I know that are plural, they're not uneducated, they're not being controlled, they're not brainwashed. Okay, they're good women that are choosing this lifestyle for themselves, and some of the best husbands I know are the plural husbands. Excuse me. And my sister wife and I, we have multiple college degrees between us. We both have I'm right now, my career's on pause because I'm raising babies, but like I have a graduate degree and I've worked in the past, and my sister wife still works. And by working, I mean like for money. Of course, people work. You have to do the laundry. I mean, I'm not talking about housework, I'm talking about working for money. But anyway, so that's definitely a misconception that I wanted to make sure and address. Another misconception is that plural marriage is bad for women, and I just have to disagree with that. I think if you have a bad sister-wife relationship, then I mean, life can be hell. Same thing with if you have a bad marriage with your husband, then life can be hell. But as a marriage structure, I think that plural marriage is good for women. I think that one of the powerful things about it is that if a woman has to choose between only the single men, then not only is she competing in basically a game of musical chairs to find the best men, but she also has a smaller dating pool. She's in a hurry to get married before all the men are taken up. And she has to try to be some amazing superwoman that's beautiful and all the things so that a man will be interested in her. In my experience, women that live plural marriage, they're more allowed to be themselves because their man has other women to fill other roles. Like, for instance, my sister wife, like, she's the baker in the family. I don't bake. I don't feel like I need to. And that's really nice for me. And like, she doesn't play the piano and I do, and she doesn't have to. Like, there are so many ways that we can just choose whether or not we want to do our makeup or do our hair. And like, the Utah has the highest per capita amount of money spent on cosmetic surgery. And I think it's because marriage is pushed, but we're a monogamous society as a whole. And so the women are literally having to compete for the men. In a society that allows, not requires, but allows polygamy, the men are basically the ones competing for the women. And I think that's good for women. So the men, if they want to have even one wife, like, men are not entitled to a wife. They should be up to it. They should deserve it. They should attract women. And so if you're allowed to marry a man that's already married, then you're not stuck just choosing from the single men. And I think it really forces the men to step up their game and like be attractive to women. So one of Celine's favorite topics, at least when I've talked to her, is hypergamy. So maybe I won't go there. I'll leave that for her. But anyway, that's probably enough from me for now. Oh wait, one more thing. Sorry.
Yes.
On the Hebrew roots, I just want to make sure and mention, because Stephen, you keep saying like there seems to be this messianic / Hebrew movement. So we are like, me and my family, we're sort of the self-chosen hub of these people. And every spring we run what we call the Restoration Torah Conference. And it's held the 2 days leading up to the biblical holiday of Shavuot, also known as Pentecost. And so we love to just attract people that are interested in both the restoration and the Hebrew background of the restoration. And so that's why we call it the Restoration Torah Conference. Anyway, I just want to make sure to mention that.
Well, I should get you in touch with Nehemiah about maybe he could speak at your conference sometimes. And also, we had Dr. Miles Jones on my program. He might be an interesting guy. He's been one of his chief right-hand people is a believer in the Book of Mormon. So I think that's why I see a lot of this cross-pollination going on. And Dr. Miles Jones himself has a Presbyterian background, but now would describe himself as a messianic follower of Yeshua.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really I love this cross breeding going on, the cross pollination that's going on with these movements that is also including people in the evangelical world. Like I literally live in a Christian community where we have 3 flags, and at the entrance we have the American flag, we have the Canadian flag, and we have the flag of Israel. And they do Feast of Tabernacles here every year. They've been doing Feast of Tabernacles
cool.
here every year since the 1980s. So they go way back on this. So
have you done tabernacles? Have you celebrated tabernacles?
oh yeah.
Okay.
I actually brought a couple of Mormon missionaries to one of the meetings here.
Good.
Rabbi Jonathan Kahn comes here at least a couple times a year to speak. So
Really?
there's a local member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who attended that service. So
You're
again,
dropping some big names there.
yes, it's pretty wild. I know, it's pretty crazy. Actually, I have my friend Yanni, who is a 101 years old, and she is a missionary prophetess who for years worked at the Christian embassy in Jerusalem. So that's it's really cool to have all these connections. So Seline, I know you're wanting to hop on. So this
Well,
is, by the way, I just want to
always,
say
yeah.
this is a great conversation we're having, and to have hear these really strong feminine voices, I think is really a delight, and I'm so glad and honored to, because I've never met you, Seline or Charlotte. So I'm getting to know you, and this is quite fun. So Seline, hop on.
Good. Yeah, no, I always enjoy Charlotte. It's been a bit since we've talked, so I'm like really excited. It's always fun to chat with you. I totally agree on the perspective of like I think that monogamy does create this unnatural competition between women. I do think that that competition between men, I think that that's actually good for men in a lot of ways. And a lot of this comes down to on the biological end where you have women who like if you want to have your own children, like have a re not your own, but like biologically give birth, you know, to children that are genetically yours, women do have a biological clock. Now, on that, you can still maybe still have a kid. Like we still have those miracle things. Like we have Sarah, you know, it's like a miraculous, of course, but like across the board, we really have fertility dropping off about 35, right, for women. And so women are on this particular clock. Men aren't. And so if a man is like not competitive in the dating and mating market, and let's say he's 40 and he hasn't been able to like get like find anyone, he still has the opportunity to like turn his life around. Like it's like there's so many things that men can do to like, hey, become competitive, like become like the best version of yourself, self-actualize, which is so good. And I think that's very especially good for men. I think men need that sort of like growth incentive. uh I think that we even see this is so silly, but we see this in like the Barbie movie where like if the men like the Kens, this is so silly, but the Kens are just like when the Barbies are in charge, they're like cool, they're fine. And then when they're in charge, they're like, cool, this is great. So I think that being able to like push men that direction is really good. And they have the opportunity to turn their life around at any moment. Like a man who's 40 years old, who's like, oh my gosh, like no one wants me. It's like, okay, well, like, you know, like work out, like develop your skills, develop some social skills, like watch some charisma on
Books.
command videos, you know, like take a couple years, work on yourself, and then like go out and meet people. And like he like by 42, 43, like, you know, he could get married and he could have his own biological children still. Like he has, or even 50, you know, like men have a timeline that they can be adaptive to. And with women, it's a lot scarier. It's a lot scarier to waste your time. So you're like, okay, when am I gonna ever have uh my own children? So there's that. And then also with hypergamy, in the reproductive relationship, we have men judge women along one axis, which is attractiveness. Now, that's not just physical attraction. There's a lot of things that go into this. This is being able to like trust that they're not going to go sleep with other men and then lead to paternal uncertainty, right? So there's that trust. There's intelligence. Intelligence is also a biology, right? And also attractiveness because it's like you're trying to find the most genetically optimal children you can have. So attractiveness is very encompassing of a lot of things. But that's the axis that men are looking for because when when in the reproductive relationship, they just are given some material and like they're not going to pay the biological cost of it. They're going to pay in investment. And then women judge men on two axes. Two axes. It's going to be on attractiveness because women are also need to be attracted to men and find like looking for that sort of, and that's driven by genetics for trying to get genetically optimal children. And they're also judging on security. So when you in the reproductive relationship, women are going to become the most physically vulnerable and mentally and emotionally vulnerable they are ever going to be in their entire life. And so you need to know the man that you are going to be engaging in that with, is he going to leave you and is he capable of doing the things you need done? So, and this is the reason why hypergamy is so important because it doesn't necessarily mean I want the best man in the whole pool. What it means is I need a man who is capable of doing the things I would normally do for myself at the same level or better than I can. Is he someone I can rely on when I'm incapacitated to do what I need done? And that can be along a lot of things. Like some women are going to prioritize more of that physical strength. Some it's like the intelligence. Some it's it's going to be a mixture of things because we're all attracted to different things. We all have different priorities, and we're all kind of different on those things, and that's great. So I think that there are people for everyone, but that's the reason why it's a biological kind of imperative versus men don't really need anything. Like there are things that like obviously right now we see in monogamy, marriage across the board along the research, it's marriage is a lot better for men than it is for women. I think it's because women are kind of forced to marry down, and that's not really what they want to be doing. For men, it doesn't really matter. Men have a tendency where like they're like, we already know this, where if a man sees a picture of a hot woman who's dressed as like a CEO or dressed as like a Burger King service worker, he is equally attracted to that woman. When you have a hot man dressed in those different roles and signaling those different things about wealth and economics and capability, and you show that to a woman, the woman is more attracted to the kind of CEO looking one. So like that does happen. And not that hypergamy is only on a wealth axis. I don't think that that's true. But you want someone who is capable or signaling the ability to be capable, and that can be a lot of things. And so it is biologically imperative in these ways. And I think that also it's important to look at in terms of, because there is a fear of like, okay, young male syndrome. Do we have all these men who are not incorporated in the dating pool? And it's like, well, newsflash, everyone, we already have that problem right now in monogamy, because right now we are in a state where women are economically independent, like from men for the most part. Women can provide for themselves. The kind of adage like any man is better than no man is not true for women anymore. You can provide for yourself. And so women are now getting to the point where they're like, if I can't have the man that I want, I'm just not going to pair up. And this is why we're seeing a decrease in birth rates, because women are just like, if I can't have what I want, I won't do anything. So men are already getting excluded from the dating market. It's just women are also being excluded, self-selecting out of it as well.
Mm.
And so like we already have that problem right now. So
Can I bounce off
yeah.
of that real quick?
Yes.
Yeah, so the idea of hypergamy is really interesting.
And
And
by
this
the
is
way, just I've never heard this word before. So can you just tell me what it means? Because I think for a lot of people in the audience, they probably say the same thing. So give the definition of what this.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's based on sociological and biological research around the world. So this isn't like a Mormon fundamentalist thing. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this. His view of mating has to do with is directly influenced by hypergamy. But most sociologists recognize this as a legitimate theory. So it's the idea as Seline described, and it takes a while to get your head around it. It took a while for me. But it's this idea that women will go for the highest quality man that they see fit, but that men will go towards multiple women that maybe aren't. They have more of a numbers when women are more devoted to like going towards the top that they can. And this is based on the reproductive cycle, how women have less reproductive time than men do. Would you say that's like a two-sentence description of it, Celine?
Yeah, it's basically just you're trying to marry up.
Yeah,
Like that's the best way to say that. Women are biologically driven to marry up. Men, they don't really care. In
Uh,
fact, there is some reason to believe that men actually would prefer to marry the same or down, because then they don't feel like their wife is going to cheat on them,
yeah.
which is the paternal uncertainty is a lot scarier for men genetically than for women.
So
Women
when you
don't have any
apply,
certainty.
yeah, absolutely. So when you apply hypergamy to polygamy, it tends to work because the men who are already married are still in the dating pool. But when you apply it to monogamy, it's really problematic because women. So in polygamy, you might have this lost boys syndrome, which is an excess of boys, right? So in monogamy, you have the idea is that you have this lost girls syndrome, which there's an excess of women who are either marrying people that they don't want to marry, or not getting married, which is what we currently have now since we're a monogamous based society. So the idea of being open to both actually solves the problem of hypergamy because people have choice. It's agency. People have the agency to choose what they want rather than having to be polygamous or having to be monogamous. So the problem of hypergamy is kind of the base of all of the conversation sociologically and biologically. And we're in spaces where we talk a lot about polygamy religiously, but we don't really talk about it sociologically or biologically. And so the agency to choose whatever marital system people want is actually the answer to hypergamy, which is the answer to the problems that are caused by monogamy, serial monogamy, or serial polygamy. So agency,
And
the
I love what
go
you
ahead.
said there, Jasmine, with like it being a choice. And this is also what Charlotte believes, where it's when you believe like allowing it as an option and allow basically the free market of women to make those decisions, it's going to equalize in some interesting ways. That's what the theory is. That's what I kind of believe is true. And so it's really cool to kind of see that. Like I think that sometimes in some of the older quotes, it's like everyone has to do it or to be exalted. I kind of wonder if it's
Yeah.
a condition for the entire people to be exalted. Like if it's just active in because like we believe in exaltation as like a people, a covenant people. When it's active in the group, then it allows for that sort of like that
Hmm.
next level. And I think that that's more how I interpret it. And I think that there's something really, really beautiful about that, about elevating the entire group. Because like, I mean, that was the Temple Recommend question back in that day wasn't, are you living plural marriage? It was, do you affirm this to be a true principle? Like that was the question. And so it's kind of like everyone needs to be polygamous in their heart, whether or not they're practicing it, which is kind of an interesting idea.
Are you all polygamists in your heart?
By the way I would interpret that, I would say yes, because I do believe that it's like a good thing. Whether or not I would ever like under like because I'm just so on the authority thing. I mean, I'm not gonna, I can't, even though I totally get like Charlotte, you make a great point with like, okay, well, you can get married monogamously, but at the same time, I'm like, well, maybe that's what the trick. We need to get it legalized, and then it's like, well, now it's legal marriage. I don't know, but the thing is, for me, it's just like yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean like whether or not I would practice it. It would depend. It's kind of like you need to we believe that marriage in general is necessary for exaltation in the church, but I don't think that means you should get married for its own sake. I don't think that means that you should just marry anyone you have the opportunity. I think it should still be based in like love and attraction and like being the right situation. And it sounds like for Charlotte and her family, that was the right situation for her family. And I think that that sort of model would be what I would want to see. I think that's probably the ethical way of going about it in its institution.
How about you, Jasmine? Are you a polygamist at heart?
I'm currently a monogamist with Don Bradley. However, he is sealed to his first wife, and they barely their son was murdered by the Springville police. And so this idea of them being sealed as a family is very comforting to me. And it's something I hold very sacred. And I cannot express the level of sacredness that I have for his bond with his first wife and their two children. I'm a polygamist at heart in that sense. I'm currently not living polygamy. The second wife, he was sealed to, and he did a sealing cancellation because she's not seen in our eternal family. And so this is the idea of consent. That is what I consented to, is that the first wife um is 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 with us for forever. The second wife, she was a net negative to the family and to the children, and so she's not. And so that's the idea of consent, is that it's pliable
Okay.
and it moves. And so I guess in that way I would be.
We know Charlotte's answer to that question as well. So I wanted to just kind of wrap this up, but I just really I feel it's really important that all these voices are heard. So I would just like, first of all, I want to thank you, Jasmine, for helping put this together. I think this is a fantastic conversation we had today. And I just would like to hear all of you just kind of give your whatever on your heart to say, or whatever you want to address that hasn't been addressed in this conversation so far. We'll start with you, Charlotte.
Okay. Well, I love my sister wife, and I am so happy to be going through life with her. And if I could snap my fingers and go back to being monogamous, I wouldn't make that decision. This is what is right. for me, definitely. And I hope that everybody who wants that can have it. And I hope that people that don't want it don't ever feel like they have to for some reason. And yeah, I guess I had other topics I would have gotten to if we had time. I think plural marriage is good for the children. I wanted to talk about some of the difficulties that plural husbands face. I wanted to get into how plural marriage helps women be more independent and autonomous.
Charlotte, I would love to have you back on and we can have that conversation one on
Okay.
one.
Okay,
Okay?
I'll keep my list here.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it very much. And so we'll have links in the description to your blog, so make sure you get that to Jasmine. And Seline, I also wanted to offer, if do you have any links or anything of work that you're doing that you would want me to link to in the description?
Yeah, I'll send you a link to either our Instagram or our website for the film production. It's film production company's Burgundy, and so that can, if people are interested in checking out the film, I would love them to check it out. We have a screening in Utah and Salt Lake this Friday, so I could make sure that
Oh,
that information. So
what,
I'll send
what's
you I'll send you a link.
what's the name of the movie and where's it going to be screened at?
It's called The Angel, and it's going to be at the Fear No Film Film Festival, part of the Utah Arts Festival, this Friday at 10 p.m. It's going to be at the Salt Lake Library Auditorium, and it's a free screening. So if you want to go ahead and check it out. And if you follow us on Instagram, Burgundy, then we always have updates about when we're going to have additional screenings.
Oh, that's great. So that's tomorrow night, right?
Yes, yes, yeah, because it's Thursday. That's tomorrow night.
Yes, exactly. All right.
So
Well,
it's
Celine,
happening.
that's great. So make sure you get that to Jasmine, and I'll make sure we put that in the description. Did you have any final words you wanted to share with the audience, Celine?
Yeah, for me, I understand that this is an intensely emotional topic and it's an intensely uncomfortable topic and something that I really, coming from a film background and an arts background, I think the best art comes from leaning into what makes us uncomfortable and really examining it and like really being like honest about that, looking at the shadow, looking at like what are we afraid of? Why are we afraid of that? What do we really think? And really digging deep into those things. And I think that engaging with things that make you uncomfortable, that's growth. Because that's what, like when we exercising is very, very uncomfortable, but it allows us to grow. And I think that that's the same thing with a lot of these emotional topics, being able to actually engage with it fully as uncomfortable as it is, I think allows us to grow. And I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to really fully engage with this topic because I feel like I've grown massively since I've engaged with it. And I would just hope that for those who find this a very tricky topic, like can find more peace and more ability to kind of build that resilience for being able to deal with it. Whatever your conclusions are, if your conclusions are different than mine, totally fine. But I hope that that's something that people feel like they have permission to engage with despite the discomfort.
Wonderful. And I wanted to say to Charlotte that maybe if you want to come back on and if Melissa would be interested in joining the conversation or even your husband, I would love to just have that conversation with you.
That'd be
So,
fun. That'd be
okay,
fun. Yeah.
we'll be in touch. And Jasmine, do you have any links to anything that we would need to put in the description? And if so,
Not
nope. Okay,
particularly.
we're all set. Okay, so Jasmine, I'll just, first of all, I just want to thank you so much for putting this together. I thought this was a fantastic conversation. It's really, actually, I feel really privileged. I've done back-to-back panel discussions that have just been absolutely awesome. And that's a real privilege to be able to do that. And I want to thank you, Benjamin, for helping with the panel discussion we did this Tuesday. And I want to thank Jasmine for this as well. And I'd like for you to wrap it up, Jasmine.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having us on, Steve. It's been such a pleasure. And I want to say, Celine and Charlotte and I, we have differences of opinion, and we're still friends. We're still really good friends. We enjoy being around each other. We enjoy sparring and having fun. And with the topic being so emotional, it is emotional, but it is also talking about God's sealing network and how we're all connected. So it's beautiful. It's sacred. And so looking at that in kind of a blue dot, larger picture perspective, I think that with the diversity that we have, agency is something that's really important to people. And and to be able to take care of the most diverse of the human family. And so because of that, I think that looking into more of a diverse sealing model, rather than just polygamy or rather than just monogamy. How about, how about all, like we say in my family, ¿por qué no los dos? Why not have everything available to people in who are so unique to Heavenly Father and to the plan of salvation. So I think that it fosters like divine respect towards each other, to be able to see differences. I think it brings a lot of spiritual grounding. I think it brings deeper connection to God. And I think that Joseph Smith, as well as the old prophets, I know there's a lot of issues with how they practice their, in their marital practices, but what their attempt was is the sealing of all of us to God. And that's a very sacred conversation to have. And so to bring a more spiritual element in, I just want to say I'm so grateful for the gospel of Jesus Christ, the allowing the ability that we have to be forgiven for our sins, as I think a lot of the scriptural polygamists would utilize, and also to look at the future in what a wonderful restoration we have, and that we're making. So, yeah, those would be my final comments.
All right, wonderful. So we're going to have links in the description to everything we talked about, including Celine's movie that's coming out tomorrow night. That's so awesome. Did you guys hear that thunder by chance? You hear it? Oh, okay, I'm glad because it's like I got paper thin walls here in my 50-year-old mobile home, and sometimes the afternoon thunderstorms are coming through, and it's like ah. But either way, I just want to thank all of you for coming on the show today, and I hope wish you well on your screening tomorrow, Celine. I hope it's warmly received. Charlotte, sounds like you have a wonderful relationship with your husband and your sister wife and your family, and that's really awesome to hear that positive side of Mormonism, of the practice of the principle. And Jasmine, of course, how's Don doing, by the way?
Thank you.
Does Don
Oh,
Don doing okay? Yeah, how's Don doing? Don Bradley.
oh, he's doing much better. Yeah,
Good.
he's doing much better. And these sealing ordinances, they really do have a lot of, we talk about polygamy as in marriages and stuff, but nobody ever talks about it in death.
Yeah.
It's important in death when people have widows and when people have children who have died. It really is a sacred topic. So thank you so much for having
Yeah.
us on, Steve, and
That's awesome.
the ability to talk about this in a more open framework.
Awesome. This was great. And actually, this was kind of inspired by Brian Hale's a phone call. He called me a few months ago and it got my wheels turning. Like, I think it is important to hear those stories of those 19th century women who were sealed to the prophet Joseph Smith, as is the mainstream consensus on that view. Of course, we've had other voices on that topic here on MBR
Hmm.
because we
Yeah.
do try to be fair and partial to everybody. And the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.